My name is Cassandra Wilson, though nearly everyone calls me Cassie. I am 34 years old, and 1 week ago, my world cracked open in a way I still struggle to process. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet night that normally passes unnoticed in the dull rhythm of my life. But that night in my modest apartment on the edge of Portland, I checked a lottery ticket I had bought on a whim and discovered I was the sole winner of $47 million. The moment itself is burned into my memory with such sharpness that even now my body trembles when I replay it. I remember sitting on my faded couch, Thai takeout cartons scattered on the coffee table, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. My television screen glowed with the lottery numbers I had just rewound to double-check. My hands, slick with sweat, clutched the small slip of paper, and the numbers matched perfectly every last one of them. At first, my mind refused to believe it. I rubbed my eyes until they burned, convinced fatigue had blurred my vision. Surely I had made a mistake. Surely this was some cruel trick of chance. But no, each time I compared the numbers again, they lined up like soldiers on parade 3/16/12/21/9/30. My entire body shook. My legs went numb beneath me, and I had to press my back against the couch cushions to stop myself from collapsing. A strange, dizzying pressure built in my chest, as though my very heart could not decide whether to race or stop altogether. My breath came out in shallow bursts, half laughter and half sob. And then amid the chaos of disbelief, a single thought pierced through: I will tell absolutely no one. That realization startled me almost as much as the win itself. Shouldn't my first instinct have been to call my mother my sister, my best friend? Shouldn't I have screamed it into the night sky or posted it on social media basking in the flood of congratulations? But instead, I sat there clutching my ticket, already planning the silence. You see, my history with family and money is complicated, more complicated than I like to admit even to myself. And the moment I imagined their faces, each calculating what this fortune could mean for them, I knew with icy certainty that this secret could not leave my lips. At least, not yet. I leaned forward, pressing my elbows into my knees, staring at the thin slip of paper that had just rewritten the entire script of my life. It looked so fragile, like something that could catch fire or crumble at the slightest touch, yet it carried weight beyond comprehension. In one instant, my years of worry over rent car repairs and overdue bills had been obliterated. But if money solves problems, it also creates new ones, and I knew perhaps better than most that wealth can be poison in the wrong hands. Outside, the world continued as usual. A car horn blared somewhere on the main road, a couple argued faintly in the apartment next door, and the rain tapped against my window in its steady Portland rhythm. But inside my small living room, time fractured. My future had just split into two versions: the life I had been living up to this point, gray, ordinary, strained, and the one that now waited dazzling but dangerous on the other side of this slip of paper. For a brief, terrifying second, I imagined knocking on my neighbor's door and blurting out the truth. I just won $47 million. The image felt surreal, almost laughable. Would they believe me? Would they smile and congratulate me? Or would envy flicker across their faces, a mask slipping before they could stop it? That thought alone pulled me back into myself hard and fast. No, this was not news to be shared lightly. In fact, I realized with chilling clarity this news might never be shared at all. Even as adrenaline surged through me, I felt something colder seep into my bones. A whisper of paranoia. I pictured family members calling not to celebrate but to calculate. I pictured distant cousins appearing from nowhere, friends with desperate stories, strangers lurking outside my building. I had read enough cautionary tales of lottery winners ruined by the very people they trusted. A memory surfaced unbidden, my father once lecturing me about financial responsibility while quietly asking for a loan that he never repaid. My sister Lisa smiling sweetly as she borrowed money for her wedding, promising repayment that never came. Jason, my older brother, crying on the phone about rehab, only for me to learn later he never went. The ticket crumpled slightly in my hand as I tightened my grip. No, I could not tell them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I whispered it aloud, testing the words in the silence of my apartment. No one can know. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else, someone colder, someone sharper. someone who had already stepped into a new identity. I set the ticket down carefully on the coffee table and just stared at it. It was ridiculous, really, how something so small could contain the power to shatter every relationship in my life. I thought about the old saying, money is the root of all evil. It wasn't money itself, I realized it was what money revealed. Like a mirror, it showed the true face of those who reached for it. For the next several hours, I couldn't move. My phone buzzed with a notification, Charlotte, my best friend, sending me a meme about her night shift at the hospital, but I ignored it. What could I even reply that I had just stumbled into a fortune larger than both our lives combined? The idea was absurd. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, my mind unraveling with questions. What does $47 million mean for a person like me? Would I become a target? Would I lose myself in luxury? Or would I cling to normalcy until it strangled me? Could I even trust myself not to destroy everything I had worked so hard to keep intact? I pressed my palms against my eyes until colors danced in the darkness. My body was buzzing as if I had swallowed lightning. That night, sleep was impossible. The hours dragged on, and with every passing minute, the weight of secrecy settled heavier on my shoulders. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry all at once, but I stayed silent because I knew that silence was the only shield I had against the chaos that was sure to come. This then was the beginning not of fortune, but of a dangerous experiment with trust, love, and loyalty. My name is Cassie, and last Tuesday I became a millionaire. But if you think that means my life got easier, you are wrong. It got much, much harder. Before that life-altering Tuesday, my days blended into one another like endless gray brushstrokes across a canvas. My life was not tragic, but it was painfully ordinary. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Portland, tucked inside a worn building that smelled faintly of damp carpet and fried onions from my neighbor's kitchen. The walls were thin, the heating unreliable in winter, and the bathroom tiles were cracked in places, but it was mine. In a world where I often felt like little more than a supporting character in other people's stories, having a space of my own mattered. Every morning followed the same ritual. My alarm shrilled at 6 o'clock sharp, jolting me from restless dreams. I would drag myself into the kitchen where the single window looked out onto a parking lot filled with rusting cars and occasional cigarette butts flicked carelessly by teenagers loitering at night. My battered coffee machine sputtered and groaned, the smell of cheap grounds filling the air like a poor man's perfume. I always drank it black, too tired and too frugal to waste milk on it. As I sipped, I would mentally tally the bills waiting in the drawer, rent utilities, my lingering student loan, the credit card balance that refused to shrink no matter how many payments I made. Numbers had always been my job, but in my own life they often felt like shackles. I was an accountant at a small marketing firm downtown. The job demanded 60-hour weeks during tax season and plenty of overtime the rest of the year, yet somehow my paycheck only stretched far enough to keep me afloat, never ahead. I used to joke that my budget was like juggling knives, one wrong move and I would bleed. In truth, there was little humor in it. Groceries required planning down to the cent. I clipped coupons religiously and memorized which stores had the best deals on everything from detergent to bread. My refrigerator usually contained leftovers, a carton of eggs and vegetables bought just before they spoiled on clearance. Transportation was another delicate balancing act. My car, a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla with a persistent rattle whenever it rained, felt like a ticking time bomb. Each strange sound made me hold my breath, wondering if this would be the day it died for good, stranding me without the means to reach work. Replacing it was out of the question. Even a used car represented a mountain of debt I could not climb. The exhaustion from my job weighed heavily, but what drained me most was the lack of recognition. My boss Arnold had a polished smile and a slick way of taking credit for my ideas during meetings. My colleague Derek was notorious for leaving early, tossing me the scraps of his unfinished work with a lazy grin. Yet somehow, he always managed to charm clients enough to win praise. I worked diligently, hoping my effort might be noticed someday, but deep down, I knew I was invisible. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I asked myself if this was all life had to offer. A constant grind of hours traded for wages barely enough to breathe. Dreams were things I buried under the weight of necessity. I had once imagined traveling, seeing the cliffs of Ireland or the temples of Kyoto. I had once considered going back to school for a master's degree in something meaningful, something that stirred my passion instead of just paying the rent. But reality pressed those fantasies flat, leaving me with little more than survival. And yet I carried one ritual that gave me a spark of hope, however foolish others believed it to be. Every Friday after work, I stopped at Gus's corner store, a cramped little place with flickering fluorescent lights and shelves stacked high with discount snacks. Gus himself was a kind older man who seemed to have been there forever. He always greeted me with the same line Rough Week Cassie and I would smile and hand him $10 for lottery tickets. My family mocked me endlessly for this indulgence. My mother called it a tax on people who cannot do math. My father would lecture me about probability and statistics, insisting the odds were laughably against me. Jason, my brother, liked to joke that I should just give him the $10 directly. It would save time since both outcomes left me broke. And Lisa, my sister, would laugh in that perfect patronizing way of hers and remind me how irresponsible it was to throw money at dreams instead of building real wealth. But for me, those tickets were not about math or odds. They were little slips of hope, fragile chances that maybe my life could change. Each one represented the possibility of freedom from bills, from worry, from constantly calculating whether I could afford a dinner out with friends or whether I needed to invent an excuse. I would tuck the tickets into my wallet each week, not because I believed I would win, but because the act itself made me feel lighter. It was the one thing in my life that belonged purely to me. Still, I never truly expected anything. The most I had ever won was $20. I bought the tickets knowing full well they were unlikely to change my circumstances. But hope has a way of keeping us alive, even when logic tells us otherwise. Looking back now, I realize how small my world was then. My life revolved around spreadsheets, bills, coupons, and quiet nights with cheap wine and reruns of shows I had already seen. I had mastered the art of appearing fine to the world, smiling at coworkers, chatting with neighbors, but inside I carried an endless tally of costs and compromises. That ordinariness was both my cage and my comfort, because in ordinary life, nothing was expected of me beyond survival. No one envied me. No one asked for more than I could give. I was invisible, and invisibility had its own strange safety. But all of that, the modest apartment, the endless work weeks, the coffee machine that hissed like an old man with a cough, was about to become the before in my story. And I did not know it then, but those gray brushstrokes of monotony were what made the shock of color to come so blinding. The ticket I bought that week would rip me out of invisibility and thrust me into a dangerous new light. But on the Monday before my birthday, as I trudged through rain-soaked streets with an umbrella that leaked at the seams, I was still just Cassie, the tired, overlooked accountant, clipping coupons and pretending I was okay. And that perhaps is the cruelest trick of fate. It does not warn you when everything is about to change. My family, to put it kindly, was complicated. To put it honestly, they were a battlefield of unspoken resentments, hidden agendas, and conditional love. If money is the thread that binds or unravels families, then ours had been unraveling for decades. The fracture began when I was 14, the year my parents divorced. Gregory and Diane Wilson, my father and mother, could not have been more different. My father, a high school physics teacher, lived with his head in equations and theories, always more comfortable explaining Newton's laws than navigating human emotions. My mother, Diane, was pragmatic, sharp, and fiercely proud, a woman who believed survival was earned through discipline and appearances. Their marriage had been a tug-of-war between ideals and practicality, and by the time it collapsed, the rope snapped right through the center of my childhood. Within 2 years, both had remarried. My father chose Stephanie, a real estate agent with a taste for high-end handbags, spa weekends, and European vacations. She wore her ambitions like armor, and though she smiled politely at me and my siblings, her eyes measured everything in terms of cost and return. My mother married Warren, a successful business owner who had more money than my father, but clutched it with the grip of a miser. Warren believed generosity bred weakness, and while he provided my mother with a comfortable life, he made it clear I was not his responsibility. My siblings carried their own roles in this theater of dysfunction. Lisa, 4 years younger than me, was the golden child. She seemed destined for perfection from the moment she entered the world. She graduated from an Ivy League university, married Paul, a surgeon, and lived in a sprawling suburban home with 2 angelic children who wore matching holiday outfits. Her Facebook page glowed with curated images of domestic bliss, perfect smiles, vacations, and Hawaii birthday parties with balloon arches. She wore her success like a crown, and the family adored her for it. Then there was Jason, my older brother by 2 years. If Lisa's crown glittered, Jason's life was rusted metal. He was charming, yes, but aimless. He had drifted from job to job, woman to woman, always with a story, always with excuses. Borrowing money had become his art form, the desperate call, the emotional plea, the solemn promise to repay. And then silence, until the next crisis. He was the kind of man who could make you laugh even as he emptied your wallet, and somehow you would still feel guilty saying no. Extended family only deepened the contrast. Aunt Martha, my mother's younger sister, was perhaps the only soul in the family who ever made me feel seen. She was a public school teacher who lived paycheck to paycheck in a tiny apartment filled with potted plants and well-worn books. Her ancient Honda rattled like bones in a storm, and her furniture was mismatched and threadbare, but her warmth was unmatched. She showed up. She always showed up birthdays, graduations, even on ordinary days when I needed someone to talk to. In stark opposition was Aunt Heather, my father's older sister. She had married wealthy and never let anyone forget it. Holidays with her were an exercise in survival. She would sit at the head of the table, pearls gleaming, sipping wine, and casually dissecting everyone's life choices. Still in that little apartment, Cassie, and no husband yet. Well, I suppose some people just aren't cut out for the traditional path. Her son Ryan inherited her arrogance without her fortune. Entitled, spoiled, and perpetually broke, Ryan nursed a gambling habit the family pretended not to notice. Being surrounded by these contrasts, the successful, the struggling, the judgmental, the kind left me feeling like an outlier in my own bloodline. I was neither celebrated like Lisa nor pitied like Jason. Instead, I was tolerated, useful when bills needed splitting, dependable when money was short, and invisible the rest of the time. Even as a child, I recognized the invisible ledger in my family. Favors, loans, and gestures of support were rarely acts of love, they were transactions. Help was given with the expectation of repayment, or at the very least acknowledgement that one had been generous. My father's new wife, Stephanie, once told me bluntly over Christmas dinner, "People remember who gives and who takes, Cassandra. Don't be on the wrong side of that equation." The irony, of course, was that my family rarely remembered what I had given. That imbalance carved itself into my bones over the years. Each time I extended help, whether it was money time or emotional support, I clung to the hope that maybe this time they would see me differently. Maybe this time I would matter. But every effort seemed to dissolve, leaving me emptier than before. Family gatherings were the worst. Lisa's children would run around in coordinated outfits while everyone admired them. Jason would charm relatives with his humor, glossing over his latest failed venture. Aunt Heather would boast about her cruises, sprinkling barbs like breadcrumbs. And me, I was the quiet one in the corner, smiling, nodding, making sure the dishes were cleared and the wine glasses refilled. It was not that I lacked ambition or dreams. I wanted more than being the dependable afterthought. But wanting more in my family often meant you were selfish. If you succeeded, you were envied. If you struggled, you were pitied. And if you fell somewhere in between, you were ignored. So I learned to keep my inner life private. I learned to wear invisibility like a cloak, safe, though suffocating. Perhaps that is why on the night I won the lottery, secrecy came so naturally. I had already been keeping secrets my entire life. My disappointments, my sacrifices, my resentment. Adding $47 million to that list simply felt like the next inevitable secret. The truth is, I did not trust them. Not my father with his lectures, not my mother with her performative nurturing, not Lisa with her perfection, not Jason with his crises, not Heather with her cruelty, not Ryan with his addictions. The only one I truly trusted was Martha, the woman with the least to give. And yet, even with her, I hesitated, because when it came to money, even the purest hearts could change. I sometimes wondered if families like mine were rare or common. Were other people's Thanksgiving dinners filled with warmth and laughter instead of hidden jabs and silent competitions? Did other siblings feel true solidarity, or was rivalry inevitable when resources were limited? I envied those who spoke of their families with uncomplicated affection. For me, family had always been a tangled knot of duty and disappointment. Looking back now, I realize the lottery did not just hand me millions, it handed me a mirror. And in that mirror, I would soon see my family in a light I had never dared shine on them before. If money was the thread that bound my family, then betrayal was the knot that held it all together. Looking back, I can trace the erosion of my trust through specific moments, each one small enough to brush aside at the time, yet heavy enough to leave a bruise that never fully faded. 3 years ago, Jason called me in tears. His voice shook as he told me he was ready, finally ready to get help for his drinking and gambling. He said he needed $5,000 for rehab and that this time was different. I wanted to believe him. I had always wanted to believe him because despite everything, Jason had this way of pulling on your heart like a puppet string. I drained what little I had in savings money I had been setting aside for emergencies and wired it to him. Weeks passed, then months. Each time I called, he dodged my questions, changed the subject, or didn't answer at all. Eventually, I learned the truth through a mutual acquaintance. Jason had never gone to rehab. He had used the money to pay off gambling debts, and within months, he was back in the same cycle. That betrayal wasn't just about the money, it was about the hope I had invested in him, the fragile belief that maybe this time my brother was going to change. Before Jason, there had been Lisa. My sister's wedding was a glittering affair, the kind you see in glossy magazines. A cathedral veil, white roses lining the aisles, a reception hall, decorated with chandeliers and crystal glasses. But behind the shine was a mountain of costs, and Lisa turned to me. "Just 2,000, Cassie," she whispered one night over the phone. "I promise Paul and I will pay you back right after the honeymoon." I didn't even hesitate. I pulled out my credit card and covered it. 5 years later, I was still waiting. Lisa never mentioned the loan again, and each time I hinted, she brushed it off with excuses. "Oh, finances are so tight with the kids in private school. Paul's hours have been cut at the hospital. We're saving for renovations." It became clear that repayment had never been her intention. To her, my contribution wasn't a loan, it was a given the way you might expect flowers to bloom in spring. And then there was my father. After a storm tore shingles off the roof of the house he shared with Stephanie, he called me in, what I thought was desperation. He said repairs were urgent, that they couldn't afford to wait. I scraped together what I could and sent him the money. A month later, while scrolling social media, I stumbled upon photos of my father and Stephanie sipping cocktails on a beach in Cancun. The roof had waited apparently, but the vacation could not. Each time it happened, I told myself it was just one mistake. Families helped each other. That's what families were supposed to do. But over the years, these betrayals stacked on top of each other like bricks in a wall, sealing me in behind a fortress of disillusionment. I think what hurt most was not just the lies, but the way my generosity was taken for granted. My family acted as though my role was to absorb their mistakes, to be the safety net they could fall back on without consequence. They did not see me as someone who struggled herself, who lay awake at night calculating bills, who clipped coupons and rationed groceries. To them, my sacrifice was invisible because it was expected. I started keeping a private ledger not of dollars, but of disappointments. Jason, $5,000 gone, no rehab. Lisa, $2,000 on credit, no repayment. Father, roof repair turned into Cancun trip. Each line was a wound I carried quietly, pretending I was fine while resentment festered in silence. And yet, no matter how many times I was burned, I couldn't stop hoping. Hoping that maybe the next time someone would surprise me. Hoping that love and loyalty could outweigh selfishness. It is strange, isn't it? How we cling to the very people who hurt us as though loyalty itself is a form of redemption. Charlotte, my best friend, was the only one who knew the full extent of these betrayals. She listened as I vented, shaking her head in disbelief. "Cassie, you give too much," she would say. "You keep pouring from an empty cup." One day you're going to break. But I couldn't explain to her how complicated it felt. This was my family. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, even if that love had conditions in practice. Walking away from them felt like betraying myself. But betrayal works like erosion. It wears down the landscape of your heart until one day, without realizing it, the ground is gone beneath your feet. By the time I won the lottery, I had already been free-falling for years. The money did not create my distrust, it simply magnified it. I think about those betrayals often, not just as memories, but as lessons. Jason taught me that desperation can be a mask. Lisa taught me that entitlement can wear the face of sweetness. My father taught me that trust should never be blind. Each scar hardened me, even as I kept telling myself I was still soft. And yet I still longed for proof that family could be more than obligation and disappointment, that someone in my bloodline would one day give as freely as I had given without strings, without excuses, that someone would see me not as a resource, but as a person worthy of care. Of course, I had no way of knowing then that my lottery win would force that very truth into the light, that it would expose with brutal clarity who my family truly was when the balance sheet no longer tilted in their favor. The betrayals of the past had already weakened the foundation. All it needed was one seismic shift, a fortune dropped into my lap to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. If home was a place of quiet disappointments, work was a stage of daily indignities. My position at the marketing firm was supposed to be stable, even respectable. Accounting, my professors used to say, is the backbone of any business. Numbers don't lie. But numbers could be stolen, twisted, claimed by others, and in my world, they often were. Arnold, my boss, had a way of turning my successes into his achievements. I remember one meeting in particular. A client was on the verge of leaving because of budget leaks they couldn't identify. I had spent nights hunched over spreadsheets cross-referencing accounts until my eyes blurred and I found the discrepancy. I drafted a financial strategy that not only saved the client thousands, but also exposed hidden inefficiencies. The next morning, Arnold waltzed into the boardroom with his tailored suit and slick smile, and as the client shook his hand in gratitude, he said, "I am glad my team and I could come up with this solution. My notes, my hours. My discovery reduced to a vague team effort. My name was never mentioned. I sat there plastering on a polite smile, feeling invisible. Then there was Derek, my colleague. He was charming in the kind of lazy way that people often mistake for charisma. He arrived late, left early, and always managed to offload his unfinished work onto me. "You're so much faster at this, Cassie," he would say, flashing that easy grin as though flattery could erase exploitation. Somehow, management adored him. He had a way of spinning small contributions into grand gestures, and I was left cleaning up the debris he left behind. The office itself felt like a cage. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a constant drone that drilled into my skull. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the communal pot no one bothered to clean. My cubicle walls were thin, lined with pinned memos and sticky notes reminding me of looming deadlines. Some days I would look at the clock and swear the second hand had slowed just to mock me. But despite the exhaustion and the thanklessness, I kept going. I worked through lunches, stayed late, answered emails at midnight. I told myself it was temporary, that someday my dedication would pay off, that someday someone would notice. But years passed and nothing changed. The promotions always went to louder voices, not to the quiet one doing the heavy lifting. It was in that suffocating monotony that my weekly ritual became sacred. Every Friday, no matter how drained I felt, I walked to Gus's corner market on my way home. Gus was an older man, maybe in his 70s, with a kind face creased by decades of smiles and cigarette smoke. He knew his customers by name, and when I walked in, he always greeted me the same way. "Long week, Cassie," he would ask, sliding his reading glasses down his nose as if to study me. "You have no idea," I'd reply with a small smile, handing him $10. He never mocked me for buying lottery tickets. He never recited statistics about my slim chances. Instead, he would wink and say, "Hey, someone's got to win." Might as well be you. Those little slips of paper weren't just numbers to me, they were lifelines, tokens of possibility in a world that felt locked tight. For the price of $10, I bought not the dream of millions, but the dream of freedom. Freedom from Arnold's condescension. Freedom from Derek's half-finished assignments. Freedom from the endless grind that left me too tired to think, let alone live. My family never understood. They laughed whenever the subject came up. My mother would say, "You're smarter than this, Cassie. Why waste money on fantasies?" My father would launch into probabilities, citing odds so microscopic they made me feel foolish. Jason would smirk and say, "Just give me the cash directly, I'll at least buy beer with it." Lisa would laugh, sipping her latte in her pristine kitchen, and remind me that smart people build wealth, they don't gamble for it. What they didn't understand was that it wasn't about wealth. It was about hope. And hope, fragile as it was, kept me breathing through weeks that might have crushed me otherwise. I'd take my tickets home, tuck them into my wallet, and forget about them until the drawings. Some weeks I won nothing. Other weeks, a few dollars. Once, 20. Those tiny wins felt like breadcrumbs dropped along a dark forest path, small but enough to keep me moving forward. In those moments, I would let myself dream, just for a little while. I imagined a life where I could wake up without panic gnawing at my stomach. A life where I didn't have to weigh every purchase like it was a crime. A life where I could book a plane ticket without calculating how many months of groceries it equaled. Sometimes I even dreamed of generosity, not the kind my family demanded, but the kind I longed to give freely. I thought of Aunt Martha struggling on her teacher's salary and imagined paying off her medical bills. I thought of Charlotte working brutal hospital shifts and dreamed of covering her student loans. I wanted not just freedom for myself, but the joy of lifting others who deserved it. But then Monday would come. Arnold would smirk, Derek would dump files on my desk, and reality would settle back in like a heavy cloak. The dreams folded away as quickly as they appeared. That was my life before. A hamster wheel of deadlines, obligations, and invisibility with $10 tickets serving as my secret rebellion against despair. Each one was a whisper of a life that could be a rebellion against the ordinariness pressing down on me. I had no idea that one of those tickets, the one I bought on my 34th birthday, would finally whisper back. The day I bought the winning ticket was my 34th birthday, though at the time it felt no different from any other gray Tuesday. Work had drained me to the marrow that week. Arnold had once again taken credit for a financial strategy that I had crafted, one that saved a major client thousands of dollars. I remember sitting at my desk staring at the glow of my computer screen, feeling as though my efforts had been sucked dry and tossed aside. By the time I left the office, the Portland sky had opened into its usual drizzle, a fine mist that seeped through my thin coat. My umbrella, bent from years of use, tilted awkwardly against the wind. I trudged through puddles toward Gus's Corner Market, the small neon sign glowing faintly like a beacon. As I pushed open the door, a familiar jingle rang from the bell above. Gus looked up from behind the counter. His kind eyes crinkled with recognition, and he called out, "Happy birthday, Cassie." His voice carried warmth, the kind that reminded me of the few rare constants in my life. I smiled, surprised. "You remembered." "Of course," he said, sliding his glasses back up the bridge of his nose. "I remember all my regulars, the usual." "Yeah," I replied, then hesitated. For reasons I still can't explain, I reached into my wallet and pulled out a 20 instead of a 10. Maybe one extra today for luck. Gus raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a grin. "A birthday splurge, huh? Maybe today really is your lucky day." He handed me the tickets with a wink. Normally, I let the machine pick my numbers. Quick picks were easy and they saved me from overthinking. But that day, something made me pause. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe the symbolic weight of turning 34, or maybe some small whisper from fate. Instead of letting the machine decide, I carefully chose 6 numbers myself. I thought about the people who shaped my life for better or worse. I picked my birth month and day 3 and 16, my mother's birthday 12, my father's 21, Aunt Martha's birthday 9, and Charlotte's, my best friend, 30. 6 numbers, 6 connections. 6 pieces of myself tangled up in people who had defined my story in ways both painful and precious. I slid the slip of paper into my purse and left the store, unaware that I had just folded the future into my pocket. That night, I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, a small birthday indulgence, and uncorked a bottle of wine Charlotte had given me. She had texted earlier wishing she could celebrate with me, but her shift at the hospital kept her trapped until dawn. So it was just me, the rain tapping at the windows, and the muted glow of my television. The lottery drawing was scheduled for 8 o'clock. I barely noticed. I scrolled through social media watching as acquaintances posted photos of elaborate birthday dinners, weekend getaways, surprise parties surrounded by friends. My celebration felt pale in comparison, noodles wine silence. But I had long since grown accustomed to birthdays that passed quietly. It wasn't until nearly 8:30 that I remembered the tickets. I grabbed my phone and lazily pulled up the lottery website, expecting the same outcome as always: a small sigh of disappointment, maybe a laugh at my own foolish hope. The first number appeared on the screen: 3, my birthday month. I smiled faintly. Coincidence. The second: 16, my birthday day. I sat up straighter, my heart ticked faster. The third: 12, my mother's. The edges of my vision tingled. The fourth: 21, my father's. My hands began to shake. The fifth: 9, Aunt Martha's. My chest tightened and I held my breath. And then the sixth number: 30, Charlotte's birthday. Silence. Utter, terrifying silence. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to bridge the gap between chance and reality. One by one, every number had aligned. My fingers went numb. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp as a cold electric wave surged through me. "No way," I whispered to the empty room. The words felt too small, too fragile. I checked again. And again. I rewound the television broadcast, watching the numbers drawn live, each one falling into place like a cruel miracle. My vision blurred as my hands shook violently. The remote clattered to the floor. I had done it. I had actually done it. $47 million. That's what the website said, blinking on the screen like a taunt. I was the sole winner. No one to share it with. All of it mine. After taxes, it would shrink to around $28 million. But even that was an unfathomable number to me, someone who had celebrated a $20 win as though it were treasure. I had spent years calculating whether I could afford laundry detergent or dinner with a friend. And now, here I was holding a slip of paper that made those struggles obsolete. But instead of joy, fear flooded me. Fear so thick it was suffocating. I remembered reading stories about lottery winners, stories that ended in misery, families torn apart by greed, friendships dissolved under the weight of expectation, strangers banging on doors begging for a slice of fortune, lives crumbling under the sheer pressure of wealth. The internet called it the lottery curse. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the winning ticket lying before me like some holy relic, and scrolled through article after article. One winner had been murdered by a distant relative. Another ended up bankrupt within 5 years. Still, another confessed that winning had ruined her marriage, her friendships, her sanity. I thought about my own family. Jason calling to ask for another loan. Lisa, with her perfect house, suddenly finding reasons to need help. My father lecturing me about responsibility, even as he asked for more. Stephanie, Warren, Heather, Ryan, all of them circling like vultures. My chest ached with the weight of realization if I told them I would become nothing more than a wallet with legs. As dawn crept through the blinds, I made my first decision as a millionaire. I would claim the money, yes. But no one, not my parents, not my siblings, not even Charlotte would know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The morning after my birthday, sunlight slipped weakly through my blinds, casting pale lines across the cluttered kitchen table where the lottery ticket still lay. I had not slept a single hour. My body buzzed with a mixture of fear and anticipation as though I had swallowed lightning. Each time my eyes strayed to the ticket, the numbers seemed to glow, taunting me with their impossible promise. I knew one thing with absolute clarity: I could not stumble blindly into this. I had read enough about ruined winners, those who cashed in their tickets with smiles only to find their lives unrecognizable a year later. Divorce, bankruptcy, depression. Some had been robbed, others murdered. The money didn't just change them, it exposed them, attracting every greedy hand within reach. And my family. Well, I didn't have to imagine. I knew exactly what they would do. Jason would appear at my door within hours, desperate and weeping. Lisa would cluck sympathetically while calculating how much her bathroom renovations would cost. My father would lecture me about investing responsibly while suggesting retirement funds for him and Stephanie. My mother, always proud of her sacrifices, would remind me that she deserved something back. No, I could not let that happen. So I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My voice sounded strange on the phone with the receptionist half hoarse from exhaustion. I think I caught something I murmured, clutching the phone as though it might burn me. In truth, I had caught something fortune, and it was a disease if not treated properly. After pacing my apartment for an hour, I forced myself to act. I typed Lottery Lawyer Portland into my laptop and scrolled until one name appeared again and again: Philip Montgomery, estate and financial planning attorney. Reviews described him as discreet, methodical, and fiercely protective of his clients' interests. His office was in a high-rise downtown, the kind of building I normally passed without a second thought. I remember standing outside it that afternoon, my Corolla rattling into the underground garage like a sick animal among sleek Teslas and BMWs. The marble lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and money, real money, the kind people like me only brushed against in dreams. My shoes squeaked nervously on the tile as I made my way to the 22nd floor. The receptionist smiled politely, but I could feel her eyes flicking over my worn coat, my scuffed purse. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," I croaked, clutching my bag tighter. "With Mr. Montgomery." Minutes later, I sat in a plush leather chair across from a man in his 50s. Salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a calm expression that suggested nothing in the world could surprise him. Still, when I placed the ticket on his desk, I saw the briefest flicker of shock before his professional mask returned. "I need to know," I said, my voice trembling, "how to claim this without anyone knowing it's me." He leaned back, folding his hands. "You've come to the right place." For the next 2 hours, Philip mapped out my new reality. He explained that in our state, lottery winners were not required to go public. I could claim the money through a trust or legal entity shielding my identity. He advised creating a blind trust, one that would separate me, Cassandra Wilson, from the fortune itself. The trust would claim the winnings, not me personally. My name could remain hidden. He spoke of taxes, investments, the importance of assembling a team, an accountant, a financial advisor, even a therapist. The biggest mistake winners make, he said, tapping his pen against the desk, is telling too many people too quickly. Once that happens, there is no going back. I nodded, my hands slick with sweat. Relief washed over me, fragile but real. My instincts had been correct. Silence was survival. Philip's tone shifted slightly, almost fatherly. "Ms. Wilson, you need to understand something. This money will change you whether you want it to or not. It will test every relationship you have. People you thought you knew will see you differently. Sometimes it's not even greed, it's expectation. They will believe you owe them something simply for existing in your orbit." I swallowed, hard memories of Jason, Lisa, and my parents flickering through my mind. I don't want it to ruin my life. "Then you need discipline," he said firmly. "Wealth management isn't just about protecting the money. It's about protecting yourself." He slid a folder toward me, filled with documents and next steps. "We'll establish the trust file, the claim discreetly, and begin building a financial plan. You'll have security for the rest of your life. But secrecy is non-negotiable. Are you prepared for that?" I stared at the folder, my reflection faint in the glossy cover. This was the turning point, the line between the life I knew and the one waiting on the other side. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm prepared." Leaving his office, I felt both exhilarated and hollow. The city buzzed beneath me, horns blaring, pedestrians rushing with umbrellas tilted against the drizzle, but I walked among them like a ghost. No one knew that in my purse sat a piece of paper worth $47 million. No one knew that the tired woman weaving through traffic lights was about to become untouchable. And yet the secret pressed against my ribs like a weight. I couldn't tell Charlotte, though she was the one person I trusted. I couldn't tell Martha, though she was the only family member who had ever shown me real love. I couldn't tell anyone. That night, back in my apartment, I poured myself another glass of wine and opened Philip's folder. Legal jargon blurred before my eyes, but one line stood out in his handwriting. "The money is real, but so are the dangers." I placed the ticket gently inside the folder, locked it in my desk drawer, and sat in the dim glow of my lamp, listening to the rain. I was rich beyond imagination, yet lonelier than I had ever been. Wealth had entered my life like a storm, and I knew the real question wasn't how much it could give me, but how much it might take away. The following weeks moved like a dream wrapped in bureaucracy. Each day, I balanced on the edge between my old life and the terrifying, glittering new one. I still woke at 6, made coffee, and trudged into the office where Arnold stole my credit, and Derek slouched through his half-days. Outwardly, I was still Cassie Wilson, the tired accountant, invisible, forgettable. But behind that mask, I was quietly reshaping my future with Philip's guidance. The trust was the first step. We called it the Silver Pines Trust, an innocuous name chosen precisely because it meant nothing. The trust, not me, would claim the winnings. In the eyes of the state, Cassandra Wilson would not exist. Silver Pines would be the lucky winner, collecting $47 million while I sat quietly in the background unseen. Philip walked me through everything: a blind trust, bank accounts, investment portfolios, charitable giving plans, words like diversification, low-risk funds, asset protection strategies. He spoke the language of wealth as fluently as I spoke the language of spreadsheets, and I clung to his expertise like a lifeline. When the money was finally deposited, I expected to feel a rush of euphoria. Instead, it terrified me. Seeing those numbers on a statement, digits so large they looked unreal, made me dizzy. 28 million after taxes. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And yet, all I felt was dread. At night, I lay awake imagining the weight of it. Not the crisp bills themselves, but the expectations they carried. I pictured Jason's wide-eyed desperation, Lisa's carefully constructed sympathy, my father's lectures delivered with a hand outstretched. I saw Stephanie's disdain, Warren's tight-lipped refusal, Aunt Heather's judgment, Ryan's false promises. Even Martha's kind face haunted me, not because I feared her greed, but because I feared what the money might do to her, how it might strain the purity of our bond. Keeping the secret became its own prison. At work, I nodded along when coworkers complained about bills, when they laughed about the fantasy of winning the lottery. Derek once waved a ticket in front of my face and said, "Hey, Cassie, maybe this is our way out." I smiled and muttered something about odds, all while knowing the way out already sat quietly in my possession. The hardest part was Charlotte. She was the only person who had ever truly seen me, the exhaustion, the bitterness, the constant sacrifices. We had shared secrets since college, and not telling her gnawed at me like guilt-made flesh. I wanted to blurt it out every time we sat with our wine glasses, her laughter lighting up my small apartment. But Philip's warning echoed in my mind. The moment you tell the secret ceases to be yours. Once spoken, it spreads like wildfire. So I bit my tongue and played the part of the struggling friend, all while my bank account swelled with millions. During one of our late-night conversations, Charlotte sighed and said, "Sometimes I think life is just about surviving until something finally changes." Don't you ever feel like that? I almost choked on my wine, if only she knew. The secrecy bled into every part of my life. Grocery shopping, I still clipped coupons out of habit. At the corner store, Gus handed me my usual tickets none the wiser. My Corolla rattled through the rain, carrying me to an office job I no longer needed, and all the while the truth pulsed beneath the surface like a heartbeat too loud to ignore. One evening after another grueling day at the firm, I sat at my desk staring at the investment plans Philip had drafted. Funds here, trusts there, projected returns, and future security. It was solid safe, everything a rational person should want. But my chest tightened as I read through the pages. The money was real, yet my life remained unchanged. My apartment still smelled faintly of mildew. My boss still dismissed me. My family still saw me as either an afterthought or a resource. And the secrecy was beginning to suffocate me. I found myself rehearsing conversations in the mirror. What if I told my mother? Would she cry with joy or calculate her share before hugging me? What if I told Jason? Would he promise to change again, eyes wet only to vanish with my money? Days later, what if I told Lisa? Would she finally look at me as more than the flawed sibling trailing behind her perfect life? But each time the scenarios ended the same, with me reduced to a bank account in their eyes. With them taking and me giving, the cycle magnified 1,000 times by millions of dollars. It was then that the idea first began to form, not fully just a shadow in the back of my mind. If money revealed true character, maybe I could use it to test theirs, to know once and for all who cared for me and not just what I could provide. But even before that thought solidified, I knew one truth I could not go back. The secret was mine, and it would change everything, whether I liked it or not. It began as a whisper, the kind of intrusive thought you try to dismiss at first. But once it took root, it refused to leave. What if I tested them? I had spent years bleeding for my family, draining my savings for Jason's false promises, maxing my credit card for Lisa's wedding, sending my father money for a roof that never got fixed. I had poured myself out until I was hollow, always hoping, always waiting for the day when the giving would finally be mutual. But what had I gotten in return? Excuses, silence, betrayal. Now, with millions sitting quietly in accounts under the Silver Pines Trust, I had the chance to flip the story, to see without doubt who loved me for me and who saw me only as a resource. The idea came to me one sleepless night as I lay staring at the ceiling fan slowly circling above my bed. I remembered the stories I had read online about lottery winners, families collapsing under the strain of money friends demanding handouts. What struck me was how quickly relationships soured once wealth entered the equation. It was like throwing blood into shark-filled waters. But I wanted to know who the sharks were before I revealed my fortune. I wanted to see who would throw me a rope when I was drowning, not when I was floating on a golden yacht. The plan crystallized over the next few days. I would fabricate a crisis, something believable but serious enough to require real help. I would tell my family that the marketing firm had suddenly closed after an embezzlement scandal, leaving me unemployed and penniless. I would claim my emergency savings had been drained by unexpected medical expenses. And then, with carefully measured shame, I would ask for help, $5,000. It was not a random figure. 5,000 was small enough to be reasonable for those who had means, yet large enough to sting. It was the same amount Jason had begged from me years earlier for rehab. It was the amount that represented true sacrifice, an act of love if offered freely, an act of greed if withheld. The thought of it made my stomach knot with guilt, manipulative, cruel, dishonest. Charlotte said as much when I finally confessed my scheme to her one evening over wine on my balcony. "You're going to lie to them. Pretend you're broke," she asked, eyes narrowing with concern. "I have to," I insisted. "I need to know who I can trust. This money, it changes everything. I can't give it away to people who'll use me. I need proof. Real proof." Charlotte shook her head slowly. "You sound like someone setting a trap, Cassie. What if the answer hurts more than you're ready for?" I looked away down at the street where headlights glowed in the mist. Then, at least I'll know the truth. We spent hours rehearsing. Charlotte reluctantly helped me polish the story until it sounded airtight. "Your firm went under because the CEO was caught embezzling funds," she said, ticking off points like a doctor giving grim instructions. "You didn't get your final paycheck. You've been applying for jobs, but the market's tight. You had medical tests recently that drained your savings. Specifics matter. They'll ask questions." I wrote it all down in a notebook, practiced in the mirror, adjusted my tone to sound weary but not desperate. The guilt gnawed at me, but so did the memories. Lisa's "I'll pay you back soon" echoing for years. Jason's silence after draining my savings. My father sipping margaritas in Cancun while I cut coupons. I remembered each moment, and my resolve hardened. If they had shown me mercy once, just once, I would not have needed to do this, but they hadn't. I made a list of everyone I would approach: my mother and Warren, my father and Stephanie, Lisa and her husband Paul, Jason, Aunt Heather, Cousin Ryan, and finally Aunt Martha. 10 people, 10 verdicts. I even made predictions, scribbling them in my notebook like a scientist sketching hypotheses. My mother, some sympathy but excuses. My father, lectures no help. Lisa, sympathy wrapped in selfishness. Jason, outright refusal. Warren and Stephanie, dismissive. Heather, judgment. Ryan, empty promises. And Martha, the only one who might truly help, though she had the least to give. It wasn't lost on me that the person with the smallest means was the only one I had real hope for. That truth alone nearly broke me. The first call would be my mother. I rehearsed her voice in my head, the way she always sounded distracted, the way she measured love against practicality. I could already hear her suggesting I ask Lisa or that I move in with her and Warren, never considering what I had already sacrificed. My pulse quickened just imagining the conversations, the lies, the shame in my tone, the careful weaving of half-truths. I wondered if they would hear the difference, if they would notice how my words were heavier than usual. But then I remembered my family rarely listened closely enough to notice. As the week approached, I felt like an actor preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Only this wasn't a play. This was a trial. And their answers would be their judgment not of me, but of themselves. On the night before I made the first call, I sat with the notebook open in front of me, the pages filled with rehearsed lines and predictions. Outside, the rain drummed against the glass, steady and relentless, as if echoing the storm inside me. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. This is not about punishing them. This is about protecting me. But deep down, I knew it was both. The first call was the hardest. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice distracted as though she were half watching television. "Cassie, is everything okay? You sound different." That was my cue. I steadied my voice, weaving the story I had rehearsed, the sudden collapse of the firm, the embezzling CEO, the lost paycheck. I painted the picture carefully credible enough to spark sympathy, vague enough to avoid detail. I told her about the mounting bills, about the rent deadline looming over me, about the recent medical tests that had drained what little savings I had. Then came the final fragile plea. "Mom, I hate to ask, but I need help. About 5,000, just to get through until I find something new." There was a pause, a silence so sharp I could hear the faint hum of her refrigerator on the other end. "Oh, honey," she said at last, the softness in her voice tinged with calculation. That's terrible. But you know Warren and I just put a down payment on the lake house. We're pretty cash poor right now." Cash poor. The phrase landed like a slap. She went on quickly. "Have you asked your father? Or maybe Lisa Paul does well at the hospital, doesn't he?" I forced a shaky exhale as though disappointment were grief. I was hoping to avoid asking them. "But rent is due next week." "Well, let me talk to Warren and see what we can do. I can't promise anything, Cassie. You know how tight he is with money, especially when it comes to—" She trailed off, but I knew the end of the sentence, "when it comes to you." I hung up already, writing in my notebook mother sympathy, but evasive. Responsibility shifted. Unlikely to help. The next morning, I met my father for coffee at a downtown cafe. He was already seated posture stiff, a physics teacher even outside the classroom. "You look tired," was his greeting. I repeated the story, my hands wrapped tightly around the coffee cup, steam rising between us like a curtain. His face remained unreadable, his lips pressed into a firm line. When I finally asked for the 5,000, he leaned back and crossed his arms. "Cassandra," he said, his voice adopting that familiar lecture tone, "I have always taught you about financial responsibility. This is exactly why you should have kept 6 months of expenses saved. What happened to that plan?" "Life happened, Dad," I replied, biting down the bitterness in my throat. "Medical bills, car repairs. Not everyone can save like you think." He sighed dramatically. "And now you expect others to bail you out. Stephanie and I are focused on our retirement. We cannot afford to dip into those funds. It would be irresponsible." He reached across the table, patting my hand like a child. "This will be a good lesson for you. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is necessary." I walked away from that cafe with tears pricking my eyes, not because his refusal surprised me, but because the cruelty of his indifference still cut like glass. My notes read, "Father lectures zero help. Sees need as weakness." Lisa was next. I drove to her immaculate suburban home, greeted by the smell of lavender candles and the sight of gleaming countertops. She hugged me, ushered me into her kitchen, and listened wide-eyed as I explained my crisis. "Oh my God, Cassie, that's awful!" she gasped, squeezing my hand across the marble island. Her sympathy seemed genuine, and for a moment hope flickered. But then I asked for the 5,000. Her eyes shifted. "Well, we just bought the new Audi last month and the kids' tuition is so high. Plus, we're redoing the master bathroom. You know how Paul is with budgets." She trailed off her words, collapsing into a nervous laugh. But let me talk to Paul. Maybe we can help with a smaller amount. Or you could move in with us temporarily. The guest room is full of storage right now, but we could clear it out. I smiled politely, thanked her, but inside I was already writing it down. Lisa's sympathy surface level, but excuses. No real offer. Jason, on the other hand, didn't even bother with pretense. I sent him a detailed text about my situation and hours later received a one-line reply. That sucks, sis. Really tight right now myself. We'll call later. He never did. My follow-ups were ignored. Calls went straight to voicemail. The same brother who had drained me for rehab couldn't even spare a phone call. My note was simple. Jason, complete silence. Stephanie. My stepmother was colder still. When I called her, she didn't soften her tone, not even for courtesy. Cassandra. I'm sure this is difficult, she said crisply, but Warren and I are not in a position to help. Have you considered downsizing? Maybe getting a roommate. When I reminded her of the money I had once sent for their cabin repairs, her voice tightened. That was different. That was for the family property. You enjoy it too. The fact that I had been invited there only once in 5 years didn't matter to her. Stephanie dismissive transactional. Warren himself was worse. You are not my daughter, he said flatly when I called. I have supported your mother for years. Your financial problems are your own. And then he hung up. Heather, my aunt, responded with thinly veiled smugness. Well, Cassandra, I always said that company of yours seemed unstable. If you'd taken that bank job after college like I advised, you wouldn't be in this mess. She offered no money, no sympathy, only gossip. Within a day, I heard from Lisa that Heather had been telling the family about my irresponsibility. Heather, judgment, gossip, zero help. Ryan, her son, pretended at first. Of course I'll help you, Cass, he said eagerly. Let's meet for lunch. I'll bring a check. The lunch never happened. The reschedule never came. Eventually, the texts stopped altogether. Ryan, false promises. By the end of the week, my notebook was filled with scrawled notes and underlined disappointments. Out of 9 people, not one had offered genuine help. Not one had stepped forward without excuse, without judgment, without turning the conversation into a mirror of my failures. Each conversation had been like peeling away the thin veneer of family loyalty, exposing the hollow beneath. And yet, even expecting it, I felt gutted. I closed my notebook one evening and sat in silence listening to the hum of my refrigerator. I had thought the experiment would steel me, would give me clarity. Instead, it left me raw. The people who had bled me dry for years, who had leaned on my kindness until it cracked, could not muster a single act of sacrifice when I asked for it in return. All of them except one name I hadn't yet dialed, Martha. By the time I had crossed 9 names off my list, my chest felt hollow. Each conversation had cut another thread, leaving me dangling in the silence of my apartment. My notebook sat open on the coffee table pages, filled with cold observations, excuses, judgments, false promises. It was a ledger of betrayal written in my own hand. And then the phone rang. It was Aunt Martha. Cassie, honey. Her warm voice filled my ear before I could even say hello. I just heard from your mother about the job. Are you okay? For a moment, I couldn't answer. I hadn't even reached out to her yet. The fact that she had called me first, that she had sought me out, was enough to make my throat close. I'm hanging in there. I managed my voice, trembling with something that wasn't entirely rehearsed. Listen, she said firmly, can we meet for lunch tomorrow? My treat, of course. The next afternoon, we met at a small diner near her apartment. The place was worn but cozy, its linoleum floors scuffed by years of customers and its booths patched with duct tape. Martha looked exactly as she always had, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail cardigan, buttoned unevenly, eyes kind behind her wire-frame glasses. She hugged me so tightly I thought I might break. I'm so sorry about your job, sweetheart, she said as we slid into the booth. That company never deserved you anyway. Her words cracked something inside me. No judgment, no lecture, just quiet belief in me. We ordered sandwiches and coffee, and she asked thoughtful questions about my supposed job search, about whether I needed references, about how I was holding up emotionally. Her concern felt different. It wasn't perfunctory, wasn't tinged with suspicion. She was with me in the moment, listening, not calculating. When the plates were cleared, she reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. "I want you to take this," she said, sliding it across the table. I blinked at her. "Martha, no. Don't argue." Her tone was gentle but firm. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a thick stack of bills, $3,000 in cash. "It's not the full amount you said you needed, but it should help with rent at least," she said softly. I stared at her speechless. $3,000. I knew what her paycheck looked like. I knew the ancient Honda she drove, the extra tutoring shifts she picked up just to cover her rising medical costs. This money wasn't spare, it was sacrifice. "Martha, I can't take this. You need it more than I do." "Nonsense," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Family helps family, and I want you to know something else. If you need a place to stay to save on rent, my sofa pulls out into a bed. It's not fancy, but you'd be welcome for as long as you need." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. For all my careful rehearsals for all my lies, my gratitude in that moment was raw and real. "Thank you," I whispered. "Now don't you worry about paying this back right away." She continued sipping her coffee as though this conversation were the most natural thing in the world. "Get back on your feet first. Find a job you actually like this time. Life's too short to waste in places that don't value you." I nodded, clutching the envelope like it was something holy. Driving home later, the cash sat on the passenger seat, its weight disproportionate to its size. I thought about what it represented, not money, but love. Martha, who had the least to give, had offered me almost everything she had without hesitation. While the rest of my family had calculated, deflected, and judged, she had given freely without expectation. That night, guilt gnawed at me harder than ever. I couldn't let this lie linger with her. She had trusted me too deeply, given too generously. I invited her to my apartment for dinner the next evening. When she arrived carrying a pie she had baked despite her long day at the school, I felt the lump in my throat rise. As she settled onto my couch, I set a cup of tea in front of her. "Martha," I began, my voice trembling, "I need to tell you something. I haven't been completely honest with you." Her brows knitted in gentle curiosity. "What is it, honey?" "I didn't lose my job. The company is fine. I still work there. The story I told it was a lie. I made it up to see who in the family would help me if I needed it." For a moment, she was silent. I braced myself, terrified I had shattered the one relationship that mattered most. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I see. Are you angry with me?" I asked quickly, panic rising in my chest. She considered the question, then shook her head. "No, not angry. Sad, maybe sad that you felt you had to test people this way. But I understand why you did it. Our family hasn't always been kind to you." Tears blurred my vision. "You were the only one who offered to help. Everyone else had excuses or they just ignored me." She sighed, setting down her tea. "People show you who they are when giving becomes inconvenient. That's something I learned the hard way." And then she told me about her ex-husband Robert, the inheritance she once had, how he had forged her signature and spent it all on a doomed business venture. How he had said, "It's our money, not just yours," as though her trust and effort meant nothing. "Money reveals people, Cassie," she said gently. "But it also reveals us, how we use it, how we guard it, how we let it shape us. It's a mirror for better or worse." Her words sank into me like a stone dropped into still water. She was right. The experiment hadn't just exposed my family, it had exposed me. I stared at her, the woman who had given almost everything she had when she thought I was in need. The woman who had asked for nothing in return. The only person who had passed my cruel test with her dignity intact. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep the real secret from her. Not from Martha. Martha. I whispered, my hands trembling. "There's something else. Something big. I didn't tell anyone else. But I need to tell you." She leaned forward, her eyes soft. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I won the lottery. 47 million. 3 weeks ago." Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp, didn't fling her hands to her mouth the way I had imagined 1,000 times. Instead, Martha sat back slowly, her lips parting in quiet awe. 47 million, she whispered almost to herself. "My God, Cassie." I nodded, trembling, half afraid of her reaction. "After taxes, it's about 28. I claimed it through a trust. No one knows, not my parents, not Lisa, not Jason. You're the first. Silence stretched between us, heavy but not suffocating. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes shimmering with something I couldn't name, part wonder, part concern. Finally, she reached for my hand. "Oh, Cassie," she breathed. That's life-changing." A laugh broke from me, brittle and sharp. "That's what terrifies me. I don't want it to ruin me, or ruin the little bit of family I have left." Martha squeezed my hand, firmly grounding me. "It doesn't have to. Money doesn't change who you are, sweetheart. It just gives you more choices. But it can change the people around you, and you already know what they're capable of." Her words pierced me, cutting away the fog of guilt and secrecy. I needed to know Martha. I needed to see who cared enough to help me when I had nothing. "And now you know," she said gently. "And it hurt, didn't it?" I nodded, tears spilling over. "You were the only one who offered real help. You gave me $3,000 when you didn't have it to spare. You offered me your couch. Everyone else, they either made excuses or ignored me. If I had told them about the money, they would have changed overnight. Suddenly, I'd be everyone's favorite, but it wouldn't be real." Martha's face softened, her voice steady. "You've always been the one who gave Cassie. They've taken advantage of that for years. You did what you had to do to protect yourself. But listen to me carefully. You don't owe them a thing. Not your winnings, not your peace of mind. You owe yourself a life that feels safe and joyful." Her words cracked open a dam inside me. I sobbed, shoulders shaking, releasing years of resentment I hadn't even known I was holding. Martha held me as though I were a child again, her cardigan smelling faintly of lavender and laundry soap. When I could finally speak, I whispered, "I want to help you. Your health, your retirement, you've sacrificed so much for everyone else, and you never ask for anything." Martha shook her head, smiling through her own tears. "I don't need anything from you, sweetheart. I'm happy with my books, my plants, my little apartment. Just knowing you're secure is enough for me." But I couldn't let it go. I remembered the stack of bills she had handed me at the diner, money scraped together from tutoring and savings she could barely afford. I remembered the whispers about her diabetes, the tutoring sessions she picked up after long teaching days just to cover medication costs. "You deserve more," I said fiercely. "You deserve comfort. You deserve a safe home and medical care without worry and—" My voice faltered. "You deserve better than what life gave you." She touched my cheek with the gentlest hand. "Cassie, what I deserve is to see you live free of fear. That's worth more to me than money." Her humility nearly undid me again. Later, as the evening deepened and the city lights shimmered beyond my window, Martha told me something she had never shared before, about the inheritance her grandmother left her, about her ex-husband Robert forging her signature and draining it into a failed restaurant venture. "He told me it was our money," she said bitterly, as though my name on the check didn't matter. By the time I realized what he'd done, it was gone. That's when I understood that some people don't see you as a person. They see you as a resource. I clenched my fists. That's exactly how my family sees me. That's why I had to know. That's why I lied. She nodded, understanding, softening her features. "Money reveals people, Cassie, but it also reveals us. How we choose to use it says everything about who we are." Those words rooted in me. I thought about the paths ahead. I could cut my family off, completely retreat into a fortress of secrecy. Or I could confront them not with wealth, but with truth, with the knowledge of how they had failed me. The money gave me the power to walk away, but Martha gave me the wisdom to decide how. We sat in silence for a long time, sipping tea, the weight of shared secrets binding us. The fear I had carried for weeks, the suffocating loneliness of silence, finally eased. Someone knew. Someone understood. And that someone wasn't calculating what I owed her. That night, as Martha left, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "You did good, kiddo," she said softly. "Not because you tested them, but because you finally saw clearly. Don't lose that clarity." When the door closed, I leaned against it, overwhelmed with gratitude. In a family full of selfishness and betrayal, Martha had stood like a lighthouse, steady and unwavering. And I knew with absolute certainty that she would be the first person I protected with my fortune. Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp, didn't fling her hands to her mouth the way I had imagined 1,000 times. Instead, Martha sat back slowly, her lips parting in quiet awe. 47 million, she whispered almost to herself. My God, Cassie. I nodded, trembling, half afraid of her reaction. After taxes, it's about 28. I claimed it through a trust. No one knows, not my parents, not Lisa, not Jason. You're the first. Silence stretched between us, heavy, but not suffocating. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes shimmering with something I couldn't name, part wonder, part concern. Finally, she reached for my hand. Oh, Cassie, she breathed. That's life-changing. A laugh broke from me, brittle and sharp. That's what terrifies me. I don't want it to ruin me, or ruin the little bit of family I have left. Martha squeezed my hand firmly, grounding me. It doesn't have to. Money doesn't change who you are, sweetheart. It just gives you more choices, but it can change the people around you, and you already know what they're capable of. Her words pierced me, cutting away the fog of guilt and secrecy. I needed to know Martha. I needed to see who cared enough to help me when I had nothing. And now you know, she said gently. And it hurt, didn't it? I nodded, tears spilling over. You were the only one who offered real help. You gave me $3,000 when you didn't have it to spare. You offered me your couch. Everyone else, they either made excuses or ignored me. If I had told them about the money, they would have changed overnight. Suddenly, I'd be everyone's favorite. But it wouldn't be real. Martha's face softened, her voice steady. You've always been the one who gave, Cassie. They've taken advantage of that for years. You did what you had to do to protect yourself, but listen to me carefully. You don't owe them a thing. Not your winnings, not your peace of mind. You owe yourself a life that feels safe and joyful. Her words cracked open a dam inside me. I sobbed, shoulders shaking, releasing years of resentment I hadn't even known I was holding. Martha held me as though I were a child again, her cardigan smelling faintly of lavender and laundry soap. When I could finally speak, I whispered, I want to help you. Your health, your retirement, you've sacrificed so much for everyone else, and you never ask for anything. Martha shook her head, smiling through her own tears. I don't need anything from you, sweetheart. I'm happy with my books, my plants, my little apartment. Just knowing you're secure is enough for me. But I couldn't let it go. I remembered the stack of bills she had handed me at the diner, money scraped together from tutoring and savings she could barely afford. I remembered the whispers about her diabetes, the tutoring sessions she picked up after long teaching days just to cover medication costs. You deserve more, I said fiercely. You deserve comfort. You deserve a safe home and medical care without worry, and… My voice faltered. You deserve better than what life gave you. She touched my cheek with the gentlest hand. Cassie, what I deserve is to see you live free of fear. That's worth more to me than money. Her humility nearly undid me again. Later, as the evening deepened and the city lights shimmered beyond my window, Martha told me something she had never shared before. About the inheritance her grandmother left her. About her ex-husband Robert forging her signature and draining it into a failed restaurant venture. He told me it was our money, she said bitterly. As though my name on the check didn't matter. By the time I realized what he'd done, it was gone. That's when I understood that some people don't see you as a person, they see you as a resource. I clenched my fists. That's exactly how my family sees me. That's why I had to know. That's why I lied. She nodded, understanding, softening her features. Money reveals people, Cassie, but it also reveals us. How we choose to use it says everything about who we are. Those words rooted in me. I thought about the paths ahead. I could cut my family off completely, retreat into a fortress of secrecy. Or I could confront them, not with wealth, but with truth, with the knowledge of how they had failed me. The money gave me the power to walk away, but Martha gave me the wisdom to decide how. We sat in silence for a long time, sipping tea, the weight of shared secrets binding us. The fear I had carried for weeks, the suffocating loneliness of silence finally eased. Someone knew, someone understood, and that someone wasn't calculating what I owed her. That night, as Martha left, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "You did good, kiddo," she said softly. "Not because you tested them, but because you finally saw clearly. Don't lose that clarity." When the door closed, I leaned against it, overwhelmed with gratitude. In a family full of selfishness and betrayal, Martha had stood like a lighthouse, steady and unwavering. And I knew with absolute certainty that she would be the first person I protected with my fortune. By the end of that week, word of my supposed financial collapse had spread through the family like wildfire. What struck me most was not their concern, but the way the story twisted as it traveled. From Lisa's call, I learned that Heather had been telling everyone I'd been irresponsible with money for years. From my father's terse message, I realized Stephanie had painted me as manipulative, calling everyone for handouts. Each rumor transformed my fabricated plea into proof of my failings. It was astonishing how quickly their perception of me shifted from dependable supporter to financial burden. I knew then that silence was no longer enough. I couldn't simply disappear into my fortune while letting them define me as reckless and desperate. If I didn't reclaim my story, they would twist it into something unrecognizable. So I called a family meeting. The reactions were telling. Lisa was overly eager, promising to bring wine. Jason sounded defensive, asking if it was about money again. My mother sighed heavily before agreeing, as if the mere act of attending were a sacrifice. Heather sniffed over the phone and muttered something about finally addressing Cassie's mess. Only Martha, bless her, arrived with quiet support, giving me a secret smile as she stepped into my apartment. The day of the meeting, I prepared my space as though bracing for battle. My small living room with its second-hand furniture and faintly stained carpet had never felt so crowded. My family members filed in one by one, their faces tight with suspicion, curiosity, or outright disapproval. Lisa perched on the edge of the sofa as though the fabric might stain her designer jeans. My father crossed his arms immediately, already scowling. Heather's eyes scanned the apartment critically, no doubt cataloging every flaw. Jason kept glancing at his phone, avoiding my gaze. I stood in front of them, my palms damp, but my voice steady. "Thank you for coming. I know there have been rumors about my financial situation, and I want to address them directly." A murmur passed through the group, relief from some, impatience from others. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened. "The truth," I continued, "is that I'm fine. I've found a new position with better pay and benefits. I'll be transitioning into it soon." There was a collective exhale, almost of disappointment. They had come prepared to hear more, begging, more requests for money. Instead, I had stripped away their chance to feel superior. "Well, that's wonderful," my mother said quickly, her voice sugary with relief. "We've all been so worried." My father, however, leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Then why ask everyone for help? Why make it sound like you were destitute if you had something lined up?" The accusation hung in the air. I met his gaze without flinching. "Because when I thought I was in trouble, I reached out to my family. That's what family is supposed to be for. Isn't it?" An uncomfortable silence followed. Stephanie sniffed. "We all have our own commitments, Cassandra. It's not always possible to help, even when we want to." Of course, I agreed evenly. We all have to make choices about our priorities. I turned to Jason, then my voice sharpening. "Speaking of which, Jason, I noticed you never returned my calls." "Not even once." He shifted uncomfortably, his cheeks flushing. "I was going through some stuff, okay? I didn't have the money." "I didn't ask for a lecture," I said. "I didn't ask for excuses. A phone call would have been free." Lisa tried to interject, her voice high and brittle. "Cassie, that's not fair. We've all been under pressure, kids' mortgages and bathroom renovations." I cut in my eyes, locking on hers. She faltered, her face coloring. Heather seized the pause, her voice dripping with disdain. "Honestly, Cassandra, this whole spectacle feels manipulative. Running around asking for money, then hosting some grand announcement. It's exhausting." "For you," I asked softly, "or for me?" Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. I turned slowly, meeting each pair of eyes. "For years I have been the one you all turned to. Jason for rent, Lisa for wedding expenses, Dad for your roof. Each time I gave what I had, even when it hurt, and when I finally asked for help, what did I get? Excuses, silence, gossip. Not one of you except Martha offered real support. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Faces shifted with discomfort, but no one spoke. No one admitted fault. Instead, there were sidelong glances, excuses forming silently in their throats. "I'm not here to ask for money," I said, my voice steady despite the quiver in my chest. "I'm here to make it clear that things will be different from now on. I won't keep pouring myself out for people who see me as nothing more than a safety net. I won't carry the weight of everyone else's irresponsibility." My father opened his mouth as if to argue, but the look in my eyes must have stopped him. Lisa fiddled with her bracelet, avoiding my gaze. Jason's face was a mask of shame, though I suspected it would fade the moment his next crisis arrived. Heather sniffed, muttering under her breath, and Martha, sitting quietly in the corner, gave me a small, proud nod. The meeting dragged on another 20 minutes, full of uncomfortable silences and half-hearted protests. But when they finally filed out, their faces stiff with wounded pride, I felt a strange sense of release. I hadn't revealed the money. I hadn't exposed the secret, but I had stood my ground for once without apology. After the door closed, Martha stayed behind, helping me gather empty coffee cups and straighten the cushions. "You did well," she said softly. "That couldn't have been easy." It was easier than I thought, I admitted. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of disappointing them, because I realized their opinion of me was never based on who I really am. Martha smiled, her eyes warm. "That's a powerful thing to understand." I sank into the couch, exhausted but lighter than I had felt in years. For the first time, the money didn't feel like a weight pressing down on me. It felt like freedom, the freedom to see clearly, to set boundaries, to choose who deserved a place in my life. And as the rain pattered softly against the windows, I knew with absolute certainty that choice would never include most of the people who had sat in my living room that night.